So I am privileged to be able to interview you, Dana. We've known each other for a little while, and I think you know I'm quite an admirer of you, of yours. In particular, as I think you know, the Admirals Baths. Yeah, this book about Valencia. So very pertinent in our area. And you know, the way that it tells a story of Valencia from the point of view of 4 different women over the centuries with different backgrounds. Can I ask you, what kind of bibliography did you resort to as a source of inspiration to write this book?
Wow, it was a pretty exhaustive bibliography. I read several books, a couple on Valencian history, a big tome that now I can't remember the writer's name. It was La Ciutat de Valencia, but Manel, gosh, I don't remember. But apart from that, there was also, I read books about the Jews in Spain, because that becomes important in the second part of the book, about Goya, because he makes a cameo in the book. I read a book about syphilis, because a character gets this disease, and Black Death, because that plays its part as well, the plague. And so because I like history and I like reading, for me, this was a fun part of the research, was reading about this. I took copious notes, but sooner or later you have to start writing. Mm-hmm. And you can't just divert yourself constantly with research. So yeah, I enjoyed that part, but the writing was probably even more fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and why is there a reason why most of your main characters, or in fact in this book, the Admirals Baths, all the characters, and from what I remember reading, Crossing on the Paris, also here, and the woman in the photograph, let's say women are at least predominant, yeah, in your book so far.
Right.
Is there a reason for that?
Well, it's true that in these 3 books, all of the main characters are women. Even though in the story of Lee Miller, Man Ray is a very important part of that book, but it's more from her perspective than his. I would say as a woman, I'm just interested in the female condition. I mean, what we go through as women, our setbacks and our triumphs, women who are traditional, women that break with tradition, the friendships between women, because there's a silly old idea that women are competitive and rivals with one another. And I've always had wonderful women friends. And that's my experience. And I like to portray that experience. Of course, there's also the way women interact with men, which is part of life, right? So by definition, we're daughters, we're often sisters, we're often wives or girlfriends, and all of these things. And so we interact with men as well, and those can be fascinating and complicated relationships.
Yes.
So nowadays, the last few things I've written, I've tried to get more of a male perspective, or at least have a balance. But I think, I don't know, the female condition is very rich.
Mm-hmm,
a lot to explore.
Yes, and it is a shame, you know, that prejudice that goes round that women can be a bit bitchy, yeah, but we don't have the equivalent between 2 men, so perhaps it's undermining women again.
Yeah, yeah, that men can be mates, but women have to be rivals.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So do you feel that you write more for women than for men? It's a double question. Or more for women than men do? So you write more for women than men write for women.
All right, so I would say that although of course I would want 100% of the population to buy my books because that would be very lucrative, but I think that women could very well be more attracted to women's fiction because they can relate to the characters, they can see themselves reflected in some ways, and I think there's an attraction to that. But for centuries, women have been reading male-dominated fiction. I mean, you can think about some classics that don't have a single woman in the entire book. A lot of Jules Verne there's no women. There's the classic Moby Dick. I don't remember any women. You have Sherlock Holmes, who is pretty misogynistic. We love him. So I think that we have been reading men's stories for generations. It's quite interesting for men, I think, to read our stories. I would think.
Yes, yes, yeah. And very liberating also.
All right, so the second question was about male writers who write about women, as I understand it.
So do you feel that you write more for women than men write for women? So male authors, would they have women less in mind than you might?
I think know that there is an interesting test that feminists do about films. It's how the comparison of how many male characters to female characters, are the females named, they actually have names, are they something more than the love interest of the males, and these kind of questions. I think sometimes in literature it's the same. We have a lot of exceptions. We have Madame Bovary, for example, and other really well-made female characters by men. However, we have some really ridiculous ones. And one, I remember, it's a huge bestseller, but I remember laughing out loud at the portrayal of a woman in the Da Vinci Code. Have you read that?
No, I haven't, no.
Well, we have a specialist in her field, and yet she knows nothing about it. And the male has to explain everything to her. And she's always astonished with his genius. And had they chosen to make her a person who was a person without studies or something like that, you could say, okay, why not? But they made her a specialist, and then she was not bright enough to understand what was happening.
Just taking a second position, just being ignorant.
Being the Dr. Watson, the person that would say, oh,
yeah,
right.
Yeah. Which doesn't, yes, I agree. I mean, it doesn't ring right at all.
Yeah,
it's not really
unbelievable.
Understanding a female psychology, that.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful example. Okay. Can I ask you what motivated you to write the Admirals Baths? Because
well,
it's quite a big endeavor.
It was, yeah, it started because I was given the job to translate the web page into English.
Mm-hmm.
And the web page was very exhaustive. It talked about, of course, the architecture, the history, the palace that was associated with it, all of these different things. And I became more and more interested in it. And then I decided, one day I was reading about first non-noble couple to buy the baths to try and make a go of this business. And it was a very short passage about this humble couple that bought the baths. They didn't have enough money. They got into debt, and then the man died. And the woman tried to manage the baths, tried to run them for a few years, and then finally had to sell to a rich miller. And I thought, that is a story in itself. And that was the seed of the novel.
That's amazing.
That's Angel's story.
Yeah. Because anybody else would have just let that pass by, yeah, but it took somebody to see the story. It was in your mind already.
It brought to mind a lot of questions for me, because you think, well, what kind of person with a business, he already had one business, a bakery, buys another? Mm-hmm. Is this a man that is attracted to risk? What kind of what did the wife think about the debt? She was probably angry. Were they happy? Were they in love? Was this a marriage of convenience or some other thing? And what happened when he died? Was she devastated? Was she relieved? Mm-hmm. And the person who bought the baths, was he an opportunist trying to get something cheap, a good opportunity, or was he her savior? So these were kind of questions that I wanted to answer in this part of the novel. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Okay. Can I move on to more questions? A little bit about your evolution as a writer. The first one is, how did you discover your writing talent?
The first very many things that I wrote were private. I had no intention of publishing them. Mm-hmm. They were about me. They were serious writing projects, but they weren't fiction. I did try and use dialogue and description and make it funny or interesting. So the first thing was the journal of my trip on the Camino de Santiago. Mm-hmm. In the 90s. The second one was when I went to live in Costa Rica with my small children for 6 months, and I kept a record of that, more or less for them. And then I decided to write my autobiography alphabetically. And so instead of chronologically, I decided to take every letter of the alphabet and tell an anecdote using that letter as an inspiration. So for example, A was when I had my appendix removed when I was a teenager.
That's an interesting approach.
So I would really, if people are interested in writing, it's a very evocative approach. I would really recommend writing something autobiographical, but nothing as exhaustive, nothing as kind of overwhelming as start to finish. Something I was born, but just using interesting anecdotes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So for somebody who might be planning to write something in the future, it'd be nice to get an idea. What is your daily writing schedule like? What's it like? What's the life of an author like?
Well, if I'm working on a project, I usually like to write in the morning. I feel kind of after the morning coffee and the New York Times crossword puzzle, I like to start writing, start working. And then in the afternoons, I might spend more time doing research, reading, or especially with historical fiction, you have to document what you're talking about. Even though you can't make it sound like a history lesson. That's important, right?
Oh, yeah.
So then for me, it's also very important when I've finished for the day, I have to leave it at a very easy moment. I can't leave it in the middle of a difficult passage because my future self will have difficulties and think, oh no. So I want to work through anything difficult to be kind to my future self.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day I can just start kind of in an easy place, and it can move, it can flow.
Okay.
And then it's also very important to, after you're finished with the first draft, to let it sit for maybe 3 months. And then you can do something else or read other things or imagine another project. But then after 3 months, you look at it with fresh eyes. You think, this is terrible. And you make all kinds of corrections and you make it a much better book.
Yeah, it sounds like
that's very
strategy.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This also sounds quite full on, you know, quite hard work.
Well,
both
a lot
the
of
writing
people
and
do.
the research at the same time. Yeah.
I think a lot of people start projects, they start books, but a lot of people don't finish, right? And because they find that it's a slog, right? That they get bogged down, get to a difficult place, and they can't move on. I think that it's very gratifying, and it's something I love doing. I really enjoy it.
I guess it does sound a lot easier to start than to actually complete a project. You
Right.
have a lot of power of will to.
Well, that's the thing is, for example, my sister is a much better writer. In fact, she has no self-discipline. So to be a writer, to really make it work, you need, yeah, sure, you need some imagination and creativity and talent, but you also really need boring bits, like the self-discipline it takes to just finish what you start, you know, and not just waiting to be inspired, because you know, you can wait and maybe not really feel like it, but you have to do it.
Yeah. Sounds like good advice.
Well, for anything, I think.
Oh, yeah, but writing a book is quite something. Yeah, it's quite a big project.
Right. Or learning English is an enormous project.
Yeah.
You have to continue.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so how as a writer, do you have a plan in mind before you start writing the book? Or does the story somehow evolve along the way?
For me, it's very important to know the end of the book. So when I begin a book, I know the end. And the important thing is, how do I get there? And this is my goal, this ending. So normally I have some good ideas that I can go step by step, but sometimes road changes. You take a detour, and sometimes you didn't expect to do that. Or sometimes you just change your mind completely. For example, Fatima, I thought in the beginning that her family would live in the Grau and be a family of fishermen. But then I completely changed that idea and made them potters from Paterna. But I think there's a lot of decisions to be made writing fiction. And naming the characters, sometimes you play with that, and sometimes just the idea of naming a character will lead you in a different direction.
Okay, so a story can kind of take on its own avenue and, you know, go a different direction to what you initially
As long
planned.
as it takes you to this place at the end.
Okay.
There is some freedom in the middle.
Okay. Okay. So that must be exciting for you as well as a writer. I don't know where this is going to take me now.
Sometimes in Crossing on the Paris, for example, that book was quite pre-planned. I had notebooks and notebooks about their backstories and their personalities. And I knew their parents and their birthdays and so much information about each character. There are many things about those people that didn't make the final cut. But to me, they were very, very alive, for example. The last book I wrote, it was during the confinement. And basically,
this is one of your unpublished ones.
Yes, yes. And I knew the end, but I just started writing. I just started writing without any of the pre-planning, without the preparation. I think this book probably benefited from that freedom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So a little different, this question. Do you feel that writing helps us grow as people? And what about reading? So does, you know, the fact that you're writing, it must make you develop more than, you know, a normal life, let's say, or an ordinary life.
Well, for me, yeah, writing, I mean, even if you're not writing fiction to be published, the act of writing can be very therapeutic. If you've had a bad experience, even an argument with a friend, you can work it out on paper. It can be very consoling to reread those same words later. I think you can. I think writing can be a very healthy experience. And I think most people that have issues are often recommended to write. That said, I think fiction is a little bit different. That maybe a lot of people want to pull their hair out when they're writing fiction, especially if they have expectations to make money or to have a bestseller. It can be frustrating, or I don't know. It depends on your expectations. What do you want from writing? What is your motivation for writing?
Can I ask what is your motivation for writing?
I've written a lot of very personal things, private things. The projects I was mentioning before about the Camino de Santiago or about Costa Rica, these things I would photocopy for friends or family, just to share my experiences. So I didn't have a lot of expectation about that, but I enjoyed the process. And then with fiction, sure, if you're writing a novel, you want to share it. You want, just like the storyteller in a village wants people to gather around the fire and listen. You want to share that with as many people as you can. For me, it's not important if a person gets my book from a library or if a friend loans it to them. I never thought I would make a fortune, but it would be fun to do more book events in Spain, be able to go to different places and give talks. That would be fun. I've always thought book fair tourism could be very interesting. So yeah, I would like to share my work probably with more people. It's been more limited, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you do have a lot to share.
Thank you.
Yeah, someone like you, we would really benefit from hearing more of. Okay, so next question is a little bit about the feedback that maybe you've received. So for example, have you had any feedback from Spanish or even Valencian readers with respect to how Valencia is depicted by a non-Spanish writer?
In general, people are very pleased with the way the city and its evolution has been portrayed. Of course, I was a little worried that maybe it's possible, I'm not a historian, it's possible that I've written something that's incorrect. After all, it's fiction. So I was hoping that nobody would say, that's not true, that's not how it was. But in general, people have been very pleased. And in fact, a lot of people have told me that they had never heard of the Admirals Baths before they saw the book, that they didn't know they existed.
That's how I feel myself.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you just brought it into existence for me. Yeah.
That actually they learned a few things about their own city, thanks to an outsider's point of view. And of course, I think it's obvious when you read the book that it's a city that I love. I'm not trying to flatter anyone, of course, but I think it's a very complex place, a very interesting place, a lot to. I mean, you could write more books about the history of Valencia for sure. Yeah.
Yes, but unfortunately, we don't hear so much. You know, even if you study history at school, you would not get to that level of detail. Yeah.
Right.
So for me, it was very refreshing.
Yeah. And the history you learn in school is inevitably the kings and queens and the Visigoths and the big battles and the wars. And for me, the most interesting thing about history is everyday life. How did people live in the past? And so that's why it's so fun to choose bathhouse as a point of departure, because this is the epitome of everyday life. How did you wash yourself in the past? And what did you eat? How was the family arranged? Did people go to church? What did women wear? All of these things, for me, are the most interesting thing about history. Everyday people.
Yes, yes, I would agree.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the Admirals Baths has been translated into 2 languages so far.
It came out in Spanish in June, in Catalan in November, I think.
Okay.
And so it's available now in both languages.
Can you tell us about other books? You kind of mentioned before that you had one that you wrote during the confinement. So apart from Crossing on the Paris and The Woman in the Photograph, what other plans have you had, or do you have in mind?
Well, the main focus for me right now is to try and find a publisher for that book. The name of it is Birds Have Hollow Bones. And it is about 3 young people living in New Orleans. It's a coming of age novel. And one of them, they've just left high school, and one of them decides to go into the Marines, and one of them has the fantasy of becoming a singer, a kind of in the clubs and bars of New Orleans, which is where the book is set.
Okay, so this would appeal more to a younger
Well,
audience?
you know, I've thought about that. Is this a young adult book? I don't think so. I think it's really difficult to always categorize, or it's a bad idea. Always categorize. What is this book? What is the audience for this book? I just read a book that I loved. It's called The Lincoln Highway. Does that ring a bell? Or
No.
okay, it's by a man. He's an American author named Amor Paules.
Okay.
I don't know why his parents named him Amor, but that's his name. He wrote a delightful book a few years ago called A Gentleman in Moscow, which was absolutely delightful. And so I was really excited about reading his new novel. And I was interested that the characters are all teenagers, yet it's not considered for young people. So I think it's not necessary to categorize them that way.
Okay, okay. So to anyone who wishes to write a book, so maybe people who hear us later, you know, kind of wondering, I'd like to get into this. What word of advice would you give them?
All right.
Yeah, well, writing a book.
Yeah, you would not believe how many people tell me, oh, yeah, I have a great idea for a book. Or I think I'm going to write a memoir about my life because my life has been so crazy. And the only thing you can say is just do it. Stop talking and start writing, because you can learn by doing. But the most important thing is to get the first draft, because the fun part, in fact, is editing. The fun part is improving what you have. The scary part, of course, is the blank page. So anybody that thinks they want to be a writer, all they can do is try, right? It's like Yoda says, right? What does Yoda say? Oh, he says there is no try. Sorry. There is only do, maybe.
There's a brand, I don't know, like Nike. Just do it.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. There you go.
Okay. Okay. So, but I imagine most of the work is in your first draft, or is there actually more work in the editing phase?
I suppose that would depend on each person. But for a beginner, I would think that editing might even be more important than that first draft. A friend of mine just gave it a go, and I was very proud of him. He actually completed the first draft, and he asked me for comments, and I gave him loads, and I think more than he expected. And I said, don't have to do this immediately. You can think about it. But he was really motivated. But he, I think, might have more work ahead. Yeah.
Okay. What qualities do you think a writer needs to have? What personal qualities?
Yeah, I think we talked about this already, that even if you have loads of imagination, if you don't have the determination and the self-discipline, it's really hard. Really hard.
Okay. If for people who would like to learn from you, for example, I was discussing this with some colleagues at the EOI at Sagunt, and you know, we're all impressed with your wide variety of vocabulary. Yeah? So how did you acquire it? Because you know, not all authors have it.
The vocabulary, interesting. So it seems to you that in my books there's more words or more variety.
More difficult words, yeah.
Oh, really? Difficult words.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Students ask me a lot what books I would recommend to them that would be easy enough for a B2 or a C1 student. I always think that any novel for a native speaker would be quite difficult. Anyway, I will answer your question. So it's possible that because I grew up in a family of academics, my parents were both university professors, and so that's a possibility in that kind of atmosphere. I also speak French and Spanish, and I think that really when you speak second languages or third languages, this really broadens your scope. And words like, we have the word in English moribund, but in case if you don't know moribundo, maybe you don't know that this word exists in English. Yeah, right?
I hadn't heard of it.
Right. Yeah. So there's all kinds of interesting things that come from other language or Latin that maybe if you don't know other languages, you're not aware of. But I think the most important key is reading, to be a voracious reader. And I read a wide variety of things, from the classics like I like Edith Wharton. I mean, I'll read from that to Harry Potter. I think that for me, the most important thing is it's well written and that it's believable. I believe the story. Right? And so the more you read, the more vocabulary comes your way.
And a question about, for our English students, do you have any advice for English students who want to improve their language skills or their vocabulary, their grammar?
Well, I think reading is, I know everybody says the same thing, but I do think that's very helpful. I know that today there's loads of apps. I had a student some years ago that was addicted to a vocabulary app. Now I've forgotten the name, but he was always learning vocabulary on the bus and everywhere. His grammar was terrible. He had the most incredible vocabulary. So I don't know if it's, you have to do a variety of things. You can't just do a vocabulary app.
No.
It's helpful. I mean, everything helps.
Okay. One last question about the future of reading. How do you see it? Yeah, we've got different devices and
right.
But funnily enough, I think on International Book Day, it was it came out in the news that because of the pandemic, people have been buying more books than before. So how do you see it? How do you see the future of reading?
Well, for me, reading is essential. It's an essential part of the human condition, because when we read, we can travel in time and space. We can, we can actually feel like we are in a Chinese village in the early 20th century if we're reading Pearl Buck. I mean, we're transported to that time and place. But even more important is that we learn empathy. We learn how it feels like to be in somebody else's shoes. And even people that we don't necessarily like, we can get a greater understanding of that person. And so for me, it's essential, but it's true that just like stories started at the beginning of time as an oral experience, and then it became a written experience. So it went from the community to the individual. And then stories now are also visual. And many people prefer to get their stories on Netflix or in video games. I don't think that's a terrible thing, but I think do we still get that sense of empathy with the characters if we're watching a film? I don't know. Maybe. But I think that reading, I think it won't go away. I think it's true now, fewer people are reading, especially younger people. I think it's true that even for everybody, this is a big temptation. That even if we're reading a good book, after 20 minutes, we think, oh, is somebody talking to me? We're distracted. I think universally, we are distracted by our phones, which is a problem.
Yeah.
I'm not against ebooks. I think ebooks have advantages, especially for students. If they're reading a book that they find a little bit difficult, there's always the option of finding the words in the dictionary just with a click, which is fantastic. I think paper books, I think they won't go away. I think we will even have them in another 50, 100 years if we are still here. What do you think? Tell me.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I much rather have a paper book if I'm reading late at night, just you know, less exposure to electronics. But I also like the convenience of having loads of different books in different languages just on a device like that.
Yeah, I mean, and you can travel with it.
Yeah.
Also, if your partner is sleeping and you want to continue reading, you can turn off the lamp and still have light on your Kindle.
Yeah, yeah.
It's pretty great.
Yeah.
But
I think, yeah, we are creatures, you know, I think the times of storytelling round a fire, you know, is even though that has evolved, and we have paper books and we have ebooks and tablets and etc. I think we will never stop being in awe about different stories, and we love to be told stories. So I think
right,
we'll just it's part of human nature.
I mean, I certainly told my children's bedtime stories, and I think I assume that that's something that will never stop, right? Telling children stories, but I think adults love them as well. And charismatic people that people are attracted to and want to talk to at a party, are those people that are telling great anecdotes, right?
True.
So it's maybe a different form of storytelling, but they're stories nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's all the questions I had for you. Thank you very much for your time.
Of course.
And good luck at the
always happy to talk with the Escuela Oficial in Sagunt.
Yes, and hopefully, you know, after this more serious part of the pandemic, at least, we'll have you back and have some discussion with our students also, maybe next year.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. All right, Eva. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.